Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's conversation. I'm here again with Chris Burton, Silicon Valley entrepreneur and IT business consultant, who has been telling me his story in part one and part two, and whose print interview as well is now either in the middle of it's right now in the middle of being fine-tuned and will shortly appear on the Everyday Concerned Citizen and on Medium. So Chris Burton has been telling me all about a Voice to Skull program, a dark covert ops, black ops program that he's been pulled into, which is very much part of today's CIA/DIA MKUltra extended program. This is current day MKUltra that we are hearing about. This is the living Manchurian candidate program that we are hearing about. And it's extraordinary to be talking to Chris and to be hearing what he has to say. So this is simply part three of his own story, his own life experience. So he's going to simply get right into that. So thanks so much again, Chris, for stepping forward to tell us your story. Welcome.
Thank you, Romola. Thanks again for covering this and putting in, so many hours into our stories, helping us communicate them. But it's frustrating. You and I spoke for a couple hours after we tape recorded part two.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I wanted to make it clear to everyone out there that we're victims. Especially with voice to skull that's interfering with your brain waves, and it's difficult for us to communicate sometimes. I didn't tell the audience that I was kept up for almost 48 hours before we filmed that. They knew we were going to film it, and they tortured me the whole night before that, and kept me up. And they can do all sorts of things to just screw up an interview. And you can tell after being sleep deprived how difficult it is, to find words and kind of concentrate. So I kind of went off on a tangent a few times. So we're going to stick to the program here. They let me sleep last night, so I feel great today.
That's great, Chris. I'm really glad. I think part two was a very interesting and different kind of interview, but I think what we covered there was a great deal about the program itself, right? You talked a great deal about the different kinds of treatments and the actual nature of the torture that you are being put through. And this is psychological and mental torture. And I think you described it in great detail and really very well. So I think it was very valuable, in its own way. And I think it gave us both of us a chance to speak in a rather impassioned way about the gravity of the situation, that this Voice to Skull program literally is holding people captive. This may not be physical captivity, but it is most definitely mental and psychological captivity. And it's through the use of military-grade electromagnetic weapons. And this is what needs to be stressed and underlined over and over. So this is not something that people are being held in captivity by their own delusions or fantasies or hallucinations, etc., which no doubt is a kind of captivity as well, in the mental health arena. This has nothing to do with mental health. This has to do with the takeover of the human brain, the healthy, functioning, completely healthy, and mentally whole human brain, and transforming it and attacking it in many, many different ways with the use of electromagnetic weapons, with the use of voice-to-skull technology, and everything else that's associated with it that we have talked a little bit about, the biorobotizing, etc. So I understand you're going to go into it into greater detail today. So, I'm really glad you're rested today and that we can focus on the subject, as you say.
We're at the mercy of our torturers. They know what they're doing. If they want to make you sound, schizophrenic and make you have to search for words, they'll do it. I told you the story about being on the phone at this company I was working for in Menlo Park, and what I meant to, what I planned to tell this person, I'll give you a call tomorrow, and what came out was, I'll give you a call yesterday. That has never happened to anyone I've ever known, or to myself, or any, when that happened, they did it to scare me. I just, oh my gosh, what are they doing to my brain? Some minutes, one day they made it very difficult for me to write a single email. One paragraph, it took me an hour. I couldn't make sense of the grammar. I couldn't make sense of the words, which ones came before the other. And then when it was over, I went right back to work typing emails. So right before that moment, I was typing emails. They did that to me, to shock me. So, as we go through these things, I hope everyone, watches all 3 podcasts so they can kind of pick out how to describe this, how to describe my story, because that's what it's all about. So I won't waste any more time, reviewing. I think last time we left off, after, I told my friend about Voice to Skull. He didn't believe me. I called the police on me. And then, they continued to harass me. And then they threatened my life if I continued working in IT staffing. So I had to shut down my career, basically. And so I started these charity fundraising companies, which were all 3 of them were a pretty big deal. I had the project lead, team leader of a systems engineer, Unix systems engineer from the Hartford Insurance Company. He was the team leader of their storage group. And that's one of the largest data marts in the world at Hartford. And he was my business partner at PosCorp. So I had the vice president of finance from Informatica on my board of advisors. So I had, important people. I was trying to do this the right way, involved in these companies. This is a gentleman named Glenn Gels. So, at every step of the way, working with these people, checking in with them, explaining, the business opportunity, what we're doing to try to, tackle it, working, every day to make, create relationships with executive directors, and all for the purposes of eventually going public with Voice to Skull. But, while it was happening, to communicate, that I'm a good person, that, I haven't done anything illegal. I'm not a terrorist. I shouldn't be put into this terrorist, stranglehold, this captivity program, this testing program. So that's what's going through your mind. We'll do, they threaten my life if I worked in IT. I'll do anything in the world, to continue, broadcasting my innocence to the outside world. And the chain of command hopefully will see this and realize he's a good person. So that was my strategy, and I kept with it for 7 years. So, unfortunately, the recession hit, and I poured in all of my money, hundreds of thousands of dollars into the startup of these companies. And so eventually, I lost my loft to foreclosure. And again, all of these stories have more to them. But, I couldn't work in IT. At one point, I tried to get back into IT, and, they torture the hell out of me. And, I'll share a couple quick stories with you. Around the time, or just after I lost my loft, I moved into this kind of rental, and I was working on my 3rd charity fundraising company. This was the daily deal site for pets that I was doing with the Colorado Veterinary Medical Association and Ralph Johnson over there. And one of the gentlemen I asked to help me sell as an outside sales rep for pet family deals was a gentleman named Paul Longfellow. And he worked with me for a few weeks. And then one day, Voice to Skull told me, and again, I'm tortured all the time. When these guys when we're working together on the business, they weren't torturing me. But as soon as they left, it's back to the treatments, back to, setting up elaborate stuff. And so they told me that over Voice to Skull that Paul, Chris, is going to quit your company. He's going to go to work for his friend's golf tea time scheduling startup. And, I had no idea. I knew Paul golfed. He's a really good golfer, but, he never told me anything about this. So about 4 days later, I hadn't heard from Paul for a few days. And on day 4, he called me and said, "Hey, bro, I just wanted to let you know," because they were working as commission-only sales reps. I couldn't afford to pay them anything. I'd lost all my money. And he was such a good guy. He was helping me out. And he said, "Hey, bro, I just want to let you know I can't work with you any longer. You know, I got a job with my friend. And I said, oh, really? What is your friend doing? He said, well, he started an online business that schedules tea times for users. And I would go to the different golf clubs and sign them up as clients. I said, oh, great, Paul, you know, wonderful, you know, it's, you know, good luck with it. You know, thank you for everything you've done to help me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, when that happens, you know, you're thinking, well, they're tapping our phones. Who can possibly tap our phones? You know, it must be the government. So around that time, after they'd kind of established themselves as you know, as being capable of tapping my phones, whatever that meant, President Obama came to town to give a speech at DU, and the night of his speech, voice to skull, he was torturing me, and they said, Chris, you know, we feel bad. You know, President Obama's, you know, is in town, and you know, we'd like you to meet with him and talk about voice to skull and everything that has been going on. You know, because at this, you know, you're not familiar with a lot of other victims' cases. You think you're one of the only people in this program, so you know, you think about this stuff, and then, you know, it kind of hit me. Well, that would be kind of a stupid thing to do, because if they weren't part of the government, they could lead me into driving around downtown Denver, or, you know, around, you know, the DU campus, and then, you know, tell me over voice to skull to take a left here or take a right here, and put me in a position that, you know, could make me a patsy, you know. All they'd have to do is explode a bomb, or, you know, or shoot a weapon, and then, you know, they'd have me at that location at that particular time, and I'd be a patsy. And this whole time I'm thinking about my relatives, I'm thinking about Vera Gallon Davis, I'm thinking about my clients and my executive, you know, at the fundraising companies, and, you know, and my reputation and my family, you know, family. So, you know, I said, no, absolutely not. I'm not going to do that. And so, you know, the treatments continued, and so I ended up moving in with a friend of mine named Matt, and that was about a year, you know, about a year later, and again, right around this time, I had Christopher, the person who had helped had hired my company at Business Objects, contacted me. He was the vice president of infrastructure for Yahoo at the time. And he said, you know, he had a lot of work for me. Yahoo, as we all know, was hacked into, and it was a major data breach. Well, I was the person asked to help deploy Windows 7 company-wide, you know, globally for Yahoo. And then, and I couldn't do the project. I mean, I told Christopher, yes, okay, I'll do it. But, you know, they had threatened my life if I worked in IT staffing. So it was a big chance I was taking.
Oh, I see.
I was just about to lose my loft. So I decided to bring in the company I used to work for, called CompuCom Systems, as a partner, because they have these processes, ITIL processes, that are kind of needed for big, you know, rollouts like that. So you know, instead of my company handling the project, I wanted to partner with this, you know, $2 billion systems integration company, and then they can use my company for the staffing piece or something. So I didn't want to be responsible for the whole project. Well, that was going beautifully, and I got back in touch with some of my old colleagues there, and one of them is a woman who's very integral to their operations on the West Coast, and so, you know, this went on for a few months, and I thought, oh my gosh, maybe I can, you know, kind of rebound here with this project. You know, this was a $6 million project. You know, the desktop support project was $3 million. The server upgrade project was $3 million. So I thought, oh my gosh, this is great. And then the day after we got our we had our services agreement, but then we had our statement of work signed. Carol Bartz was fired from Yahoo, which was just awfully strange. My company, DOC, had done Carol Bartz's Windows 95 deployment when she was CEO of Autodesk. So it made sense that my company would be involved in another in Carol Bartz's project at Yahoo, because we had already done a, you know, a
Mm.
6,000 person deployment. So everything had lined up for me, and then she got fired. So that was it. And I was, you know, still working on pet family deals. So I had to move in with a friend now who was a great guy, but he traveled a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then Voice to Skull really came down on me.
Mm-hmm. Can we pause there for just a second?
Sure.
Chris, because I wanted to just actually ask you a couple questions. One was, I thought it was amazing that you actually kind of figured out the whole President Obama possible setup as a patsy thing. And then you decided not to follow the directions. Is that what happened? I mean, is that how the whole Obama story ended? You just didn't follow their directions, and so nothing came of that?
Yeah, they started speaking to me kind of like military guys, you know, kind of in a command center, you know, really authoritarian, you know.
Oh, I see.
And
Hmm.
you know, so
Interesting.
they always do that. Sometimes they speak really you know, with, you know, a lot of intensity to try to you know, lead you to believe that they're, you know, that this is a black ops project, and you have these, you know, veteran, you know, military types who are running it. So they're very stern and, you know, speak to you like this. You know?
I see.
So this was one of those times when they did that, and it was, you know, they had put me through so many treatments. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that, building up friends. First, there's neighbors, then friends, and then, you know, neighborhood. Excuse me, like Denver city politicians and the mayor, and then city council people. They brought in all of these people, but you know, nothing ever came of it. So you know, they knew I was working with CompuCom systems, and they did something really cruel. This woman who I spoke with, they started to use her in the treatment. They didn't at this point, and I'll, you know, kind of continue the story, but
Yeah.
later used voice transformation and used her voice for, you know, you know, they started about 2 years ago in East Palo Alto. I'll talk about these Palo Alto torture sessions. Very important. It's a perfect example of what, you know, of a skit that Voice to Skull can put on that utilizes the hive mind telepathy and gives you a glimpse of what this technology might look like if Facebook adopted it or something like that. But we can get into that. But they played a really cruel joke and introduced this woman and her voice and the way she spoke, which is very quick. She's a very quick thinker. And they did it perfectly. And they still torture me with her voice. You know, even though I don't believe she's involved one single bit, they just enjoy torturing me with her voice. But, you know, after they tortured me in Palo Alto, and we'll get into that story, they, to let me down, because these treatments always kind of ramp up. They make you think you're going to be released, something big is happening, and then bam, they just pull it away from you. And the way they pulled it away from me was to use her voice. And while she was talking to me, her voice, you know, automatically morphed during the sentence to a man's voice. Just
Oh
like
my goodness.
And it was just kind of heartbreaking, you know, because at the time I believed that she might have been involved, you know. So I go into detail in the interview about this.
Yeah.
So what happened at Matt's house is that they put on a big treatment having to do with a kind of a mock trial. I call it the vetting sessions treatment. They knew Vera Gallon-Devlis was in my extended family. You know, they knew they had done all of these things that were legal, and I was studying on CAT, you know, Convention Against Torture, studying about those things, studying up on them. And so they created a 2-week period. My roommate was gone; he was traveling, so I was in his house alone, and they were kind of running this ongoing, you know, kind of trial, you know. And my cousin grew up with Melissa Gilbert from Little House on the Prairie, and she was the president of the Screen Actors Guild. And they used her voice to kind of as a and created her character, introduced her character as kind of my defense attorney. You know, Chris, we know your cousin went to Buckley Academy. We know he grew up with Melissa Gilbert, you know, blah, 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 elementary school through high school, you know, with a lot of these people. So we asked her to come in. We made her, you know, we she signed the documents, and now she's part of Voice to Skull, and she's defending you. So she, for 2 weeks, we went through my whole life story, everything I've ever done, all of, talked about my character, and, and she would always defend me. And, one night, they had a gentleman who I call Hoarse Voice, because he kind of speaks with a hoarse voice like this. And he was a Voice to Scholar who would come in to defend me, and once in a while, don't talk about Chris like that. Chris already answered your question. You don't need him to rehash that. So I got used to him kind of jumping in to defend me. And so one time he jumped in to defend me and said something in an impassioned way. Chris has already, talked about, that test in high school where he cheated, because I cheated on a test in high school, and they were giving me a hard time about it. So don't talk to him like that, And so he was giving this this retort, and I was, I realized while he was talking that my lips were moving. And I looked down at my hands, and my fists were clenched like this. So I was beginning to feel his emotions through me. And so, and they were talking about this test I had cheated on. And I always said, I'll admit to, I'll answer your questions, but you have to Mirandize me. You have to show yourselves, and then I will answer your questions. Put me on the stand, and I'll answer your questions honestly, or else, I don't have to say anything to you. And that was my way of kind of sticking up for, my civil rights, and so they said, but Chris, we still like to talk to you about the test. Do you remember, can you tell us what happened? And I said, no, I'm not going to answer any questions. But when I started thinking about the test and actually cheating on it, kind of visualizing how I was, where I was seated, and whose test I was looking off of, one of the Voice to Scholar said, "That's it, we got him." And
wow,
and that was.
We should pause right there, because, in a sense, what you're talking about literally is not merely are these guys sending voices into your head. They're sitting around looking at computer screens, right? They're picking up brainwaves. They're translating images. They're translating brainwaves into images and into words as they are occurring inside your brain. In other words, they're doing that BCI, CBI thing, brain-computer interface, computer-brain interface thing. They're kind of translating. And it's happening in real time.
Happening in real time. And before that, they were only Voice to Sculling me. And I would talk back to them out loud like this. So, when this starts, you think Voice to Skull is just a voice, and that they can, hear you somehow. But it's way more involved than that. And this is when they started revealing that. So this is during this vetting session treatment, they where Melissa Gilbert was my defense lawyer. One night they had an individual who supposedly was from the Muslim Brotherhood kind of observing. And he was this kind of calm, character who didn't speak much. But they were trying to blame the Greek mafia in Denver for doing this to me, because I had read something about the Greek mafia being involved in Voice to Skull. I'd read an article, a couple months before it or something. So I'm Italian, and so one of my closest friends back in Denver at the time was a Greek guy, and so they tried to make me think that this Greek friend of mine was involved in putting me in the Voice to Skull. And he was a pretty well-known person in some circles in Denver. He was a DJ, but a really successful one. He started something called the Global Dance Festival in Denver. And so they were talking about him for about 4 hours one night. The Melissa Gilbert attorney was saying, "We know for a fact that Kostas is in the Greek mafia, and that he put Chris into Voice to Skull. And we're not going to let you get away with this." And so there was another gentleman there who was kind of supposedly an Italian, and and they were testing me. They were making me think that, it's this Italian versus Greek thing, and which side am I going to fall on? Am I going to, back up the Italian guy who's there, or am I going to defend my Greek friend, even though they're telling me he put me into voice to skull? That was kind of what the treatment was about. And so they went on about this guy for 4 hours, and yelling and screaming. I mean, I was just sitting there with, like I am through most of the treatments, just like, what, when is this going to end? What's going on? You have to listen. You can't tune this stuff out. It cuts right through everything. So, so they ended the treatment, and then 2 days later, I read on Facebook that this gentleman's mother-in-law had died of an aneurysm, and I had met her about 2 weeks before. She was, a younger woman in her mid-60s or so, and very nice woman and grandmother, and that she had just collapsed and died of an aneurysm. And this was 2 days after they brought up this huge treatment, built up this 2-week thing that, culminated in this accusation against my Greek friend. So I thought, this is ridiculous. I mean, my lips are moving, my hands are clenching, they are, my friend's mother-in-law passed away, and he and his wife were very good friends of mine. So, to take it out on this person's wife, it just, when things like that happen, you just have to, think about what's going on and do the right thing, and so for me, doing the right thing was, taking all my money out of my bank account and buying a one-way plane ticket to Cambodia and writing about voice to skull and what happened. So that's just what I decided to do. I have to come out with this stuff,
Mm-hmm. So in a way, you felt culpable in some way. You felt that you were part of this, that they were projecting blame on you, or projecting involvement, in a way.
Well, they weren't blaming me for anything. The way they set it up is that, I'm in voice to skull. Why am I in voice to skull? There are some people who don't want me in voice to skull. And because Vera was the, counsel to the Arab League and Palestine's legal advisor, they brought in this Muslim Brotherhood character to make me think that, well, here's someone who, is possibly, concerned about how I'm being treated, or how, what's going on in these deliberations, how are you, whether or not these deliberations are fair. I didn't know which side the Muslim Brotherhood person was on. I had read a little bit about, what had happened in Egypt, but I didn't know where that person was falling. It was all a test to see who I would kind of, how I would respond to some of these kind of examinations, in these court proceedings. Would I, kind of kiss people's asses? Would I come out staunchly against the Greek mafia or the Muslim Brotherhood? So I was playing it cool with everybody. I was just kind of playing it cool with everybody.
But in a sense, all of this was you had kind of figured out it was still following a pattern of interrogation, much in the style of, CIA interrogations, right?
Yeah. And at this point, they knew everything about me, and they were just kind of, throwing out the same, kind of questions, the same high school stories. I had a car accident in high school, does Chris feel guilty about that? Does he think it was his fault? This cheating incident, does he feel guilty about it? Does he believe it's his fault? These are the kinds of determinations, these are the things they're trying to sense about. They were trying to sense about me during these deliberations. Is he a man of good character? Should we let him go? Because obviously he found himself in this program for some reason. One of our people put him in for a good reason. And you never know who's doing it to you and why. So, that's voice to skull. So, I went.
It sounds like you're constantly fed these stories about what this voice to skull program really is, as well, on top of everything else, on top of all the torture that you're being subjected to.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to, convey. What are we talking about? For all of, day after day, hour after hour, this is the stuff they talk about. They use these torture techniques, and build up these scenarios. And when one ends and the next one begins, they just bring in some new characters. And and you forget about half of this stuff, but every single time they add another, page to the manuscript, it's following exactly what happened before that, and before that, and before that, and before that. It would take a full-time project manager to manage all of the stories that they're building up, over time. All of these friends being involved. I mean, one particular friend could take up, 4 weeks of torture. Trying to, when they tell you that they might be involved, and then they torture you when you're at his house. I have some friends who are Denver police officers. They try to make, they would come and hang out at my loft, and grab beers and stuff together, and they try to make me think that they were involved, and they did some kind of suspicious things when they were in my house, which made me think they might have been involved. And so every friend or contact you have is brought into these treatments, and they'll make, they'll create something that lasts a week or 4 weeks long. So I had I grew up, born and raised in Denver. I had a lot of friends. I went to 2 different elementary schools, so I had kind of a young childhood group of friends, and then my kind of elementary through secondary school, group of friends, and then my CU Boulder group of friends, and then my art gallery friends, and then my kind of work friends. So, and then fraternity friends. I was an ATO at CU Boulder. So, think about all of those people, and they're always trying to bring them in, and so, so I went to Cambodia to research torture. I focused on trying to start these fundraising companies as my way out of this. I didn't focus on reading about voice to skull. There wasn't a lot of information on the internet. So I read Darius Rajali, and read all sorts of books about the Vietnam War and Cambodia to try to understand kind of the history of torture, the distribution of clean, no-touch torture techniques, and how that might be related to what I'm going through, which seemed to me like this clean torture that is impossible to go public with. So I read in Cambodia for the first 4 months, and then moved to a place called Sihanoukville, which is in southern Cambodia, and they tortured me the whole time. The hotel I stayed in Phnom Penh was a block away from the Russian embassy. So they made me think that I was talking to Vladimir Putin one night. I never believed it, because he didn't have an accent and he spoke perfect English. But they were trained, they created a treatment having to do with Vladimir. Mm. So I'm reading these books, I'm sharing passages with them. We're learning about Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge and what happened there, and went to S21 and one of the killing fields, and it's sad stuff, and the voice to scholars, when I'd read some of the stuff, would start crying, and I could feel their emotions coming through me. So I finally decided about 6 months into my trip that I was going to just go public on Facebook. I was still researching for the book, reading articles, reading books, and still not really getting anywhere. I was just trying to honestly communicate this in a way so that someone like Vera and my family would believe me, that this stuff is real. It's, if you can believe the CIA's torturing people in Abu Ghraib, and then you can believe this is happening to me. Mm-hmm. So torturers were trying to tell me that Mark Zuckerberg was involved at this point. So I put together a Facebook post, and while I was writing it on Facebook, they were saying Mark Zuckerberg is online with you, and he's reading it, and he doesn't think you're going to post it, Chris. He doesn't think you have the balls, because it's coming out with everything, So I said, oh, really? Okay, boom, send or enter, and posted this, long story about being gang stalked, and all the way up to the point where my friend Kostas' mother-in-law was, died of an aneurysm. And I said, I don't know if she was murdered, but I'm just telling you that this is what I've been going through on a day-to-day basis. So, if if she were my mother, I would want someone to do the same thing. If there was any sort of connection, I would want that to be public. So, I put it out there, and a few people kind of responded, like, Chris, what's going on? And then one of my close friends contacted me and said, Chris, your sister is sending people emails telling them that you're mentally ill. Because when we talked in part one, my sister made me see the psychiatrist, which I only agreed to do because Voice to Skull told me to, threatened her life. And so she was emailing people saying, oh, well, Chris, he's bipolar and blah, blah, blah. And it was a disaster. I spent 7 years trying to build up my credibility so I could go public to these people in my family, and they just it just all got washed away by those emails. So I continued living in Sihanoukville. I rode a motorcycle in a rural area of Cambodia, and Voice to Skull talked to me the whole way. At this point, they were trying to make me think that they had been working with Hun Sen. I read some books about Hun Sen and the problems in Cambodia and some of his political rivals, and they were trying to make me think that some of the things I was saying might have an influence in Hun Sen, like bringing some of these people into his cabinet or something. They're always ongoing. They were always talking about something. So I'm in a rural area, I'm listening, and I'm hearing Voice to Skull the whole way. So this continued. I decided to go to Vietnam, and I moved to Vietnam. And at this point, I was just about ready. About 3 months into my stay at Vietnam, I met a wonderful woman named Tama, and we started dating and started dating seriously. I told her about what was going on, and she wasn't worried too much about, she believed me, and she let me kind of do my thing, and then something kind of cruel happened. My dad, of course, got wind of my Facebook post, and he said, Chris, I'd like you to come back home, just so your mother and I know that you're okay. And I said, Dad, I know what you're thinking, but I'm not schizophrenic. And so if you want to make sure I'm okay, what I'm willing to do is to take an objective test that can determine, whether or not I'm schizophrenic or have some other mental illness. But it has to be objective, Dad, because what I'm dealing with, can only be, exposed. It can mimic a mental illness. So I don't want to be something to be subjectively interpreted. And so I researched and found this eye test that some doctors had come up with, and that it claimed that schizophrenics kind of have a hard time following something. Their eyes kind of lag behind a little bit. And I said, well, that sounds like a good objective test. And I told my dad this, and he got back to me and he said, well, Chris, I found a place that can administer the schizophrenic eye test. And so why don't you come back home? I'll buy you a ticket. And then, just so your mother and I know that you're okay. And so I said, okay. So I flew back, and on the plane ride back, the Voice to Skullers told me, Chris thinks he's going to come back to Vietnam. Chris thinks he's coming back to Vietnam, on top of, a lot of other things they were telling me. But that was pretty major, and I thought, that's kind of strange. I left half of my things there with my girlfriend. I was definitely coming back. So when I arrived, my dad, I kind of explained, I was really pumped up. Going public with this had really pumped me up. Finally, I was free of this dark, secret that I couldn't reveal to anybody. And I just said, screw the, my career was already shot. The fundraising companies weren't making any money. And so I just said, I'm going to go public. That's it. And all of the executive directors can find out, my friends and family, everyone can find out about this stuff. That's great because, that's, I'm committed to it. And so he, the next day, he brought me to this hospital, in Louisville, which is south of Boulder. And, we walked inside, and we filled out some forms, and then they escorted me kind of through these big kind of steel doors that had been kept open, um, uh, uh, to kind of a waiting area. And so I walked through the big doors and sat down, and my dad was with me. And then, some administrator sat down and grabbed the forms I filled out. And then she said, "Bill, can you come outside for a second? I'd like to talk to you." My dad's name. And so my dad got up and walked out with her. And, I kind of sat in this waiting room area. And then about 5 minutes later, these four people with rubber gloves, walk up, and they said, "Chris, can you come with us, please?" And I said, "Well, I'm here to take an eye test." And they said, "No, you have to come with us." And I walked out into the hallway, and these big doors that had been kind of latched open, had been stuck open, were now closed. And I was locked in. So my dad set me up. And so my dad wasn't the only one. I was trying to explain this to my uncle, and his name's John Koji. And so he was an MIT educated aerospace engineer, and he worked on the Milstar project. He was the launch commander of Milstar. He's my mother's brother. And I thought he might know something about these, these waves, the voice to skull. So I was emailing him from Cambodia and Vietnam, and I was emailing my dad from Vietnam about this issue. And he sounded supportive in the beginning. He said, "Go to University of Colorado quickly and try to get, try to have a test done on you, because these microwaves can just pick, they're piercing you all the time. They can cause enormous damage to your body. And you'd have to go to the physics department to do that." But he didn't, he claimed he worked on a wave that could communicate with submarines. That's what Milstar is. It helps communicate launch commands to submarines. It's a massive satellite array. And so I kind of believed him. But it turns out later that he was just trying to get me to come back to Denver along with my dad, so they could have me put into this facility. So the voice discullers talked to me every time I went outside for a cigarette break, just to do, to get out, just to get outside. I'd go out and smoke a cigarette. And so, but they were quiet when I was inside the facility. And so they make you take medication. So I was forced to take medication. They said, "Chris, we need to tell the judge something. We need to tell him you're making progress. So if you allow us to give you the shot, then we can petition the judge to let you go," and this and that. So I said, fine. At the end, I said, fine. But they, after 13 days, they released me with a delusional diagnosis. So now I'm delusional because of my Facebook post. I mean, so thanks, Dad. Thanks a lot. I ended up flying back to Vietnam, and then I decided, well, with my girlfriend, I'd probably be better off in the United States. So I joined a startup company in Silicon Valley called Lucid Motor Company. They were called Ativa, now they're Lucid. They're an EV startup, electric vehicle startup, founded by the chief vehicle engineer at Tesla and another vice president from Tesla. So big deal company right now. They're just about to start manufacturing their car. And so their torture just wiped me out at Ativa. They tortured me, every day. They made my life a living hell. They kept me up at night like they're doing now. And eventually, and I was, kind of put into a supervisory role. I was, I hadn't worked in corporate staffing since I was 21 years old. So I had always had my own company. But they don't want you to work. When you work, they torture you, as hard as they can. And this is where they started to really introduce these terrible torture techniques that we've been kind of building up to over these last two podcasts. So I'm kind of watching the time here to make sure we can cover this stuff.
Yeah, hold on one moment though, Chris. Before you go into that, I'm hearing a bit of an echo. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, I heard it too.
Yeah, okay. It stopped. So You've talked about so much that is actually so extraordinary. That whole episode where literally, thanks to that Facebook post and your family's concern, I'm sure they meant well, but ultimately what ends up happening is that you get taken off to a psych ward. And did you stay there for a little time? Did they hold you there and medicate you, which is what I'm
Yep,
talking
13
about?
days.
13 days. And then after
Yeah.
that, what happened? How did your family receive you after that?
Well, um, what you know, my dad is a retired geologist. I think your father was a geologist too.
Yes, the same.
And, you
Interesting.
know, a scientist, and but he was a naval officer, and he's 83 years old, and he's a real straight arrow, and he's the type of person who believes anything a doctor tells him, anything a doctor tells him. And so it was very difficult when I felt so confident about, building up my credibility, and, and you could talk to anybody at who's ever known me. They'd never say anything about Chris, displaying, a personality, uh, a character, just displaying any kind of behavior that could be considered a mental illness or a sign of a mental illness. Let me put it that way. I've been tortured for 13 years. I can barely even think anymore. So it's hard for victims like me to even, come out. But if you look at my background, class clown in my high school, I won talent shows in my high school, very loquacious, a fast talker, working in outside sales, working for Aerotech. These are hardcore sales jobs. You don't go in there searching for words. You don't get
Yeah.
hired. So I thought all of this kind of built up, who I was to my parents, and especially working in the charity fundraising industry for so long. And he just said, well, the doctor thinks you're delusional. And I said, well, Dad, I mean, do you understand what I'm going public with? And it was, he just didn't want to hear it. He would rather think that, the brain can do all sorts of things, Chris. You can never be sure, what you're hearing. And when you're in my position, you're just, you're pulling your hair out because,
Hmm.
all of these things I'm talking about, the protocols, the personality traits, the nature of these treatments and how they're built up. None of this stuff is stream of consciousness stuff. It's, and I'm not a beautiful mind. I'm not a, I'm not a genius who can track, project manage the buildup of all of these ridiculous stories that, I forget about the next morning. And then they remind me that this is what's going on. And, that maintaining, it's going from friend to friend to friend and spending, weeks building up my one friend's involvement and then going on to the next friend, and then which has to do with the previous friend's involvement. And, if my brain was schizophrenic or something, I would think of all of this stuff at once, all of these things, or one particular thing that would, kind of carry through, everything I've read about schizophrenia and delusional disorder, is completely different than what I'm describing. So that's the purpose of, telling these stories. And especially when we get into the graduated revealing of these technologies, which a lot of TIs are experiencing, from voice to skull to, thought insertion or dream insertion, and then and then forced speech, and then sexual torture, men and women,
Hmm.
and then to biorobotization, and not small things biorobotization. We're talking about them taking, over your body. And
Hmm.
so this is when all of this started happening.
Hmm.
Voice discalled me for 10 years, and then the last 3 have been just these intense tortures having to do with all of this other technology.
Yes, and
So
that's why I think, it's important. That's why I wanted to pause at that whole scenario where your family, believing that they're doing, you a good turn, took you to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist comes out and gives you a delusional diagnosis, etc. And you, as you explained, your father believed the psychiatrist wholesale because he's a doctor, and Americans have been conditioned to believe doctors and to hold doctors up as demigods, and believe everything they
Mhm.
say, etc. I should know I have a sister who's a doctor. She's not here in America, but she's in London. Similar story, she's used to being held up as a demigod, she and her friends who are psychiatrists. So she holds up her friends who are psychiatrists as
Yeah.
demigods, who have the last word on the whole scenario of behavioral health and mental health. And that whole scenario in itself of behavioral health needs to be looked at. What is behavioral health? You know, what exactly does it look at, and how does it connect to actual health, etc. And in any case, so we are living in a system where psychiatry has taken over society. And so it's doubly difficult, as you say, for people who are being targeted with these 21st century military grade weapons and technologies, which are using electromagnetic radiation, to put voices into people's heads and ultimately to harvest brainwaves and to superimpose brainwaves. It's very hard for those people who are now being hit with these new technologies to get across, especially to psychiatrists, that what they're experiencing is not some kind of strange biochemical reaction going on in the head, as related to some kind of life stress or moment in one's life, etc., but it's actually
Yep.
military technology. So this is the huge challenge I think that TIs are facing today. So I'm very hopeful that everything that you're talking about, Chris, will help point psychiatrists and doctors in the right direction and make them realize that we are indeed talking about black ops and covert ops. These are indeed
Yeah.
military technologies that are being used against people.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, if you know, we know you have to understand that Russia's come out publicly about making huge investments in psychotronic technology, and so if you believe that if you read the word psychotronic, if you define that, it only means one thing in when it comes to military weaponry,
Mm-hmm.
and these are technologies that affect the brain. And Russia's come out publicly, and Dennis Kucinich came out in the Space Preservation Act with the word psychotronic, and it had to be removed. So if you understand that these technologies are being used in legislation and are being used by the Russian defense minister, then you can understand that they could possibly be weapons that could be used against Americans. And if you believe that, then how would they be used? They'd be used like the way they were used in Cuba. They would be used against people like myself, and the descriptions of their use would be just like mine. This is what these weapons do to you. And when you
Exactly.
have this program going on that is torturing people, nobody understands why they're doing it, but it's constantly kind of delving it deeper into the kind of the origin of thought, and they're able to kind of do that now, make these, insert subliminal thoughts that are almost imperceptible to you, and initiate thoughts that almost feel like your own.
Mm-hmm.
It's still very, it's always, up to this point, it's been, I could always tell you exactly when they're doing something, but they're working on it. They're working on it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and
Um,
so it's, and there is a lot of disclosure these days, from DARPA in terms of the kinds of RFPs it's putting out, and also in terms of some of the contracts, some of the information that it's already done, that they've reported on. There's some information from DARPA, there's some information from Air Force documents, from NASA documents, from US Navy documents, and from contracts, that indeed, the human brain has been worked on, is being worked on, and there's some disclosure within this field of neurotechnology. So what
yeah,
psychiatrists and doctors need to wake up to is the fact that that disclosure is connected to what TIs are indeed talking about and coming forward. Reporting victims. I prefer to use the term reporting victims rather than targeted individuals because it seems like such a deliberate
Well,
term.
I don't understand how, when I tell the nurse practitioner, my dad recently demanded that in order to spend some time here at his house here in Tucson before I leave the country, that I speak to this nurse practitioner. And so when I spoke to her, I tried to use kind of above ground technology as an example, sonic weapons, the LRAD, and she said, so let me get this straight, Chris. You last time we spoke, you said that you think people are talking to you through an LRAD, and do you still believe that's happening to you? And this sort of thing. And this was before the Cuba attacks. So what's the difference between me telling someone, yes, I'm being attacked by a sonic weapon. I can move into a few, 1 second is happening, 1 second it's not. I can describe all of these symptoms, and in my case, it's been pretty constant. But for instance, they would only do it in my car and my loft for 2.5, 3 years to make me think my neighbors were involved. Then they would start doing it in my friend's house to make me think they were involved. But when you describe things like this, they don't want to hear it. I mean, and so who's delusional? Doctors are delusional.
Very good. I'm so glad you said that. That is absolutely
Yeah.
correct. Doctors are indeed delusional, and in fact, they are underinformed and uninformed and ignorant,
Yeah.
to say the very least. And if
They
they
fit
really
the clinical
believe,
definition.
it's hard to imagine that they would actually believe that these military technologies are not, in fact, being used on people. Why would they be so naive about it? So it's either, it's a case of being deliberately oblivious and deliberately ignorant, or having been, contacted, as they say, by somebody in the covert and black ops world, and forced to sign an NDA or forced to move in that direction, or being colluding with that world of covert ops and black ops. You're either colluding or co-opted, colluding and complicit, co-opted, silenced or gagged, or you're
Or,
just plain ignorant or delusional
yeah, or
to
plain
be
ignorant,
ignoring this
underinformed.
information,
If you
underinformed.
don't, if you can't see the loopholes, what sort of program could they get away with right now? This huge this Manchurian project, Manchurian candidate project that is taking these technologies as far as they can possibly go. This race to be the first who can subliminally take over somebody without them even knowing it.
Mhm.
Um, and what my voice is always telling me is the first one who comes up with that is going to kind of run the world, and but to not understand the loopholes in the law, to not understand that Title 18 doesn't say anything about electromagnetic weapons. It describes them as weapons of mass destruction, but only at a level that is dangerous to human health. And
Mhm.
these weapons operate on the level of a cell phone frequency, so that's not dangerous. And so there are no protections. What they're doing to us is illegal according to other laws, federal laws. Like
Oh, it's
mine.
absolutely illegal by any law. They're completely taking over a human. That's and a human brain. How could it not be illegal? How could it not be criminal by any law or any international treaty or agreement that we have? I would think it's absolutely illegal, absolutely criminal. And to suggest to you, that this is some kind part of some kind of arms race, and that by robotizing, of all things, the takeover of the human brain is some kind of incredible weapon that all of these countries are fighting to establish as utter and absolute technology is, to me, extraordinary. How could
Yeah,
biorobotizing be even considered a weapon that anybody could or would approve?
yeah. Well, it's they fear that somebody's going to use it. They can't. Vladimir Putin says there won't be any more state-on-state, state-on-state wars, but violence. But they they're under they think that, at a minimum, that, these frequencies, these dangerous frequencies that, were written about by Bob Beck in '78, are going to end up being used in terrorist, attacks, and that eventually, if everyone's going after this technology, who knows, you know, uh, how this technology is going to be used by a branch of an intelligence agency, a compartmentalized group somewhere that decides, they want to, we've talked about all of this stuff.
Yes,
Who's
I know.
behind?
And if you think about it, Chris, I mean, right now we are seeing how they are using it. They are using
Yeah,
this technology currently to create and use Manchurian candidates, right? I mean, how many mass shootings do we have surrounding us? This is today, the day that we are doing this and talking about this is in fact the day after the Las Vegas shooting, about which
yeah.
we don't have many details at this point, it's true, but there we go. Another mass shooting, hundreds of, well,
Well,
50 people killed or whatever.
it's so important because, people are going to. I think this the shooter's father was a bank robber, and the FBI called him psychopathic. And so it's a good kind of time to talk about psychopathy, and kind of, you know the difference between psychopathy and mental illnesses, and what's really dangerous right now, and who's going to get the blame for this. Are they going to call this person mentally ill? His brother says he wasn't mentally ill. He was a wealthy, accountant with two planes.
Hmm.
Um, so, but with everything that Dr. Horton's put out about the dangers of psychopaths, working their way to the tops of these pyramid organizations, it's important to kind of understand that the people doing these experiments are psychopaths. The way they're treating
Oh,
us,
yes,
like,
absolutely.
and that's when people think about what is torture. What I go through on a daily business is torture. It's like waking up every day and you have your four torturers, and they know their job is to torture the hell out of you all day long. And then when they give you a break at night to sleep, you're lucky, because they're being they've decreased their torture for you. That's the respect they're showing. What is torture? It is constant pain and misery to the degree that you want to kill yourself. So that's what I want to try to talk about in this, because it's the razor's edge between life and death all day long. I'm an upbeat person. I'm an optimistic person. This is just kind of my personality, but I am miserable. I mean, I want to kill myself every day, but I don't. It's and what I want to get through are these stories, because it's going to help describe for people what it means to be tortured, and in this case, what they're trying to do is push you to the degree that you have suicide. You think about suicide. You have suicide ideation, but what you're really thinking is, the brain is thinking about its options. Be tortured all day long, or how do you get out of it? You think about suicide.
Hmm.
And that's where they keep you. That's the razor's edge that they always keep you. They can bump you more to suicide, then they, will be nice to you, and then you kind of back off of it. So I'm not suicidal, but I experience suicide ideation.
Hmm.
And when we continue with the story, I'll describe, when they ramped up the torture to push me over the edge, I had to threaten suicide. I had to think of ways to threaten suicide to make this stop. These are technologies that you pull your hair out. I mean, they would make you go insane if you're strapped to a chair. We're
Hmm.
just able to walk around. So we have, some other options open to our minds than just being strapped in, to restraints, which is,
Hmm.
terrible,
Yeah.
sort of.
And
But
this is why I wanted for us to actually talk about everything that you are going through, both, in an interview, as, we are doing, and in a podcast. So we reach different audiences, and we reach also educated and professional audiences with this information, because this is information about extreme human rights violations This is information about extreme terror that is being run by these black ops agencies. And the reason that I freely use the term, use the names CIA and DIA is also because of Project Soulcatcher, this book by Dr. Robert Duncan that many of us know about, which actually spells out. And you know, Duncan is an ex-CIA scientist. He's worked for the DoD, the CIA, and the DOJ, as I understand, and perhaps some other agencies as well. But he has stated that these programs are being run by DIA and CIA scientists. So, and my purpose here in doing these interviews and bringing these stories to light is to show the extremity of these experiments, to show how incredibly invasive they are, because that's what it appears like to me when I hear these stories. And my hope is that by presenting these stories, that other people also begin to wake up and recognize how terrible these stories are, how terrible these experiments are, these projects are. And they are tied to taxpayer money, you know, because even if it's a black ops project, it's getting money from the American coffer. And so
Yeah.
each of us, you know, as an American in this society, needs to feel responsible for what is going on. This is a living Manchurian candidate program. This is a voice to skull program that engages in non-stop 24/7 mental and psychological torture. Psychologists need to wake up, psychiatrists need to wake up, human rights advocates need to wake up, and the journalists who are sleeping in mainstream media and who are permitting themselves to be silenced and gagged also need to wake up. These stories are pointing to a crisis in American history. You know, we are living in a time period of enormous importance. What we do today matters hugely to the generations that are going to follow us. Because the tools here point to absolute control over the human mind and the human brain.
Well, you know, if you are a psychologist, psychiatrist, a neuroscientist, a journalist, a member of law enforcement, anybody, you know, you have people like me who have these, you know, 13-year-long experiences and can, you know, explain them, you know, every step of the way, explain what happened every step of the way. Even though our memories are degraded, you know, even though they can hit us with waves that could freeze me in a second, literally freeze me in a second. Any second they could just freeze me. I wouldn't be able to think of a single word. And you have us, you know, available, humanitarian organizations too. You have people like me who are available to talk about this stuff right now. But you're not going to have us for very long because we are being pushed to suicide. My torturers told me that they're going to allow me to do these podcasts and for you, you know, to publish this interview, and then they're going to torture me to death. That's what they're telling me. They're keeping me up, telling me that. They let me sleep last night, but all, you know, for the last 3 days, it's been nonstop thought interception. And I don't want to really get into that right now because people aren't ready for it, you know. But I'm free to talk about this. We can speak clearly and articulately about what these tortures are.
Mm-hmm.
The same way the Kubark manual describes psychological tortures for a person who's in captivity. Well, these are torture techniques that have been created for the specifically for the with, you know, to be combined with these weapons, to be used alongside these weapons, to be implemented through the use of these weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you can, you know, brain freeze somebody, when you can read their thoughts, when it's all done through a brain-computer interface at light speed, where the second you initiate a thought, they can respond to that thought with a statement in another person's voice. And so they have tortures where you have to sit there and think about nothing, literally nothing. And any thought you have is immediately responded to. Chris, we're gonna kill you. Or Chris, you just thought about, the pilot, the killer being a pilot. What are you gonna do, Chris? Are you gonna fly a plane somewhere? You know, what, you know, they stay on you like, 4 or 5 people, what's the term? They blanket you. And so there's no way out. When they want to torture you for a period of 48 hours or longer, you know, they have 4 people dedicated to you. They're all hooked, you know, they're all watching the computer and watching your evoked potentials and reading the language that you're using, whatever your subliminal thoughts are. It's not even your overt thoughts. When you think on the hive mind, it's kind of like thinking aloud. That's how you communicate. But they're, you know, they're doing tests about, you know, involving your subliminal thoughts. So things that are just kind of floating around in your head. And it's very hard not to have subliminal thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So when people, you know, talk about, well, clear your mind or meditate and that kind of stuff, it doesn't work because their tortures are specifically designed to elicit these thoughts. That's the back and forth torture that they want to put you in, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Sleeping torture. One of the tortures they do is every time I exhale, they'll say something. And whether it's the same statement or just they'll just continue talking. Well, what do you think Voice the Skull is about? What do you think we're going to do to you next? You know, every time you breathe out. So, you know, when you're going through that, your thought, you know, you're subliminally thinking to yourself, you know, why are they doing this? Why now? Why do you think we're doing this, Chris? Because we hate you. Why do you think, you know, it's because, what kind of people are we? We don't care what kind of people we are. We don't care, Chris. We're torturers. You know, we're professional torturers. We don't care. So, you know, that's how, and we haven't moved into the biorobotization tortures, but, you know.
Yes, and actually, we've come, you know, we're at this point 11 minutes past the hour. So, and I know there's so much to talk about. And, you know, you've done such an excellent job today going through, you know, the whole of your story and, you know, detailing a great deal of what you've been experiencing along the way. I'm wondering if we should just hold back and do a part 4 instead, do another hour and do a part 4. Because
Yeah.
that might be easier to assimilate for viewers. It's extraordinary. The point at which we are right now is such an important point because you're talking about suicide ideation, and you're also and you very kindly spelled out for pretty much anybody watching the importance of who you are, the importance of your testimony, and the importance of the testimony that you know can possibly come from anybody who's a V2K victim of this kind. You know, I know you're calling this program the Voice to Skull program or the Manchurian candidate program. So victims who are in this particular program, even more than those who are just being hit with electromagnetic weapons by the local fusion centers, are in dire straits. These stories.
We're in dire straits, and most of the time we're not allowed to communicate. You know, the 2-hour podcast we did for part 2. You know, I wasn't able to really think. You can't think extemporaneously. You know, they've taken your vocabulary away from you. They've taken access to your you know, a lot, you know, to your memories away from you. And over time, you know, you're degraded just because of the psychological torture. But then they're restricting access. So, you know, it's very frustrating because, you know, in 1 second they can make you sound like you know, a schizophrenic, you know, who can't come up with words. You know, the word salad. They're, you know, but then another moment, you know, when they're not doing it, then you're fine. You're just kind of degraded. In my case, you know, because I've been through this for, you know, going through this for 13 years. So, you know, people have to be smart when they listen to these videos. They have to understand everything that I'm saying and what psychotronic weapons can do. This is what they do. If they want to make you sound schizophrenic, they can do it. If they want to interrupt your thoughts while you're trying to find words, they can do it. You know, like I said, they can they can press a button and I won't be able to speak at all. I mean, not at all. They can press a button and I won't be able to write an email. They can press a button and control my limbs. They could speak through me. They can paralyze my thoughts so that I can't think about anything except for what they're thinking about. And if they don't want to think about anything, or they want to, you know, say, you know, something very simple, and paralyze me with this kind of thought that doesn't go anywhere, they can do it. And you're literally stuck like this. I mean, it's that bad. So people think out there that a mental illness, can do the things that I'm describing, freeze you, like this, make it impossible to write an email, a 3 or 4 sentence email. It took, make you spend 45 minutes trying to construct it because your brain can't put it together, and then snap out of it like this, like I am now. I've just snapped out of my mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
that, and then, the way I described the biorobotization, the tortures in the car,
Mm-hmm.
I talked about that a little bit, but we'll go into it and we'll
Yeah.
talk about how they built that up, and how, the different things they did to me to kind of display the biorobotization, which culminated in a full Manchurian candidate takeover,
Mm-hmm.
where they picked me up, walked me around my hotel room, made me sit down, made me stand up, and maybe, open a door and close it, and I couldn't do anything. It's like being hit with a taser. It's like a stronger electrical charge, and you are paralyzed. I couldn't clench my fists. I couldn't relax my muscles and drop to the ground. It was this person, it was this person, the clone, taking me over.
Mm-hmm.
But through the transmission of electromagnetic wave, a carrier wave that is delivering these evoked potentials, that overcome yours. I think our electrical activity is at 0.5 milliwatts or something. It feels like they're sending theirs at 0.6 milliwatts. It's stronger than yours. You can't resist it.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who says you can, think your way, think out of a voice to skull, no. When they're transmitting at a stronger, a stronger intensity than your brain is thinking, than your thoughts, are kind of transmitted by, the electrical activity in your neural impulses, in your neurons. They're transmitting at a stronger, a higher intensity, I would describe it. So, that's kind of, I guess, warming people up for part 4. And part 4 is terrible because it goes into all of these tortures, and then my attempts to try to make them stop by threatening suicide in some very, dramatic ways. And then the last one put me in the hospital for a month with burns on over 40% of my body. From my waist down, I'm completely burned.
Mm-hmm.
Skin grafts all the way. And then what they did after that to me,
Mm-hmm.
and then what my parents were doing and how they were torturing me the whole way through it. The torture is nonstop. This torture is you have to make a decision whether you want to, live every day by being tortured on a second-by-second basis or kill yourself. That's the decision we are given. That's it. We have no other options. So we're all living day to day with this torture, and while our careers are gone, while our savings are gone, and while we're, working in positions that could put other people at risk. And I'll share with you some stories about how they can, take people over subliminally for just short, moments. And so, because they've done it, I've described the things they can do to me. So I have a couple of stories that we'll share later that having to do with some people who said some really strange things to me.
Mm-hmm.
That I feel, was them being kind of taken over momentarily because my torturers started laughing, So
Yes,
anyway,
definitely. Yes, we'll get into that next time, Chris, definitely. And the thing that you've pointed to also is that what Manchurian Candidate Project victims are experiencing right now is extreme, it's dramatic, it's intense, it's a complete takeover of their minds, their brains, their souls, their consciousness in a certain way, because it's bringing them to this point of suicide ideation. But some of the things that you're talking about, which have to do with freezing people mid-sentence, losing words, losing phrasing, losing the ability to synthesize, summarize, and speak clearly, losing the ability to present, all of that and also losing short-term memory in particular. All of these are experiences, I think, that a lot of Americans today are talking about. And which really connects with mind control technology being used in a very vast way, in a very immense way across the entire continent, and how that's possible with because this is the transmission of ELFs, extremely low frequencies. This is connected to HARP, how it's connected to HARP, etc. So there's all of that, the science and tech behind mind control, which
And everything in between. Everything in between. When I describe the full Manchurian candidate takeover, you can expect them that they can do everything in between in imperceptible ways.
mm-hmm.
And so they can limit particular, they can remove particular words from you.
Yes.
When the Cuban diplomats are saying they're having problems recalling words, that is this and one aspect of this technology.
Mm-hmm.
These things. This is more than just when you think about brain damage. This isn't mental illness. This is brain damage.
Mm-hmm.
This is and think about your catalog of words, and then being stuck with kind of the 200 or most use most popular words that you use. That's where they put us. They remove our knowledge base from us. I can't remember, Mola, a single book I've read. I can't remember. I read Team of Rivals. I couldn't tell you what it's about. Better Angels of Our Nature. I just can pick out a few things from it. All the books I've read are gone. And so are my experiences. I can't remember a single story from high school. I can't remember anything but a handful of stories from elementary school. It ends up, when the Voice of Scholars and I are talking, I'm always kind of, my brain is going into kind of relating things to elementary school. These 3 stories or a handful of stories from elementary school, a handful, maybe. Really, I mean, I can remember a couple of parties from high school. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And then college, I can't remember anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can remember getting a ticket in college. That's the only thing I can remember. I mean, this is what these things are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So they're granting me access.
I think you're talking about extreme brain degradation, and that is why we need to underline the seriousness of the situation. We're talking about extreme brain degradation being performed with the use of electromagnetic weapons remotely by dark agencies working inside our country and assaulting Americans like you. So this is something we want to get across to people. And we also want to get across to people that these are along the range of mind control technologies that are actually being used on everybody. Everybody, these are extremely pernicious technologies, and everybody is at risk. Because to some extent, all of us are already being hit with different versions of these weapons. So on which note, Chris, perhaps we can bring this to an end. Do you want to say any last closing thoughts or words at this point so that we can close this session, and the next session we'll pick up the story and go into, as you say, the more intense, more dramatic aspects of your experience, which I know about because it's in the print interview already.
The print interview. And Romola, you're just a saint. You are such a wonderful person for doing this for me. I hope the viewers just hang in there and watch watch this all the way through. And then you can kind of really understand the story and be able to share it with other folks, which is the most important thing. We're victims. I would love to be in the position that anyone else, when you're living through this and you see, how everyone's carrying on with their careers, I would love to be that person who can use my God-given, strength to go out there and make money and to communicate with people. But that's being taken from me. That's what I used to be. But now, I'm so frustrated having to kind of search for words and remember how to describe these treatments, which is so hard for victims to do because it's like a running, hundreds of different commercials being played, constantly. There's stories that are intricate, and so they're always, you're following them, but to recall exactly what they said in your last torture treatment, it's very hard to do. So what I tried, when I'm piecing together these treatments and I'm explaining to them, it's very important that people take notice of these things, because it's taken 13 years for me to kind of put it all together, to understand how to describe it, and that's so other people can describe it for themselves before people like me are gone. They could torture me to death, and and people wouldn't be able to kind of explain the differences between voice to skull and a mental illness, and I'm trying to meet other TIs. I know some other TIs who are also doing a very good job describing it. And Ramola's been so nice to offer to interview them. So we have, there are more interviews to come from victims like myself. But we need everyone out there to listen so they can, translate this, because we can't do it. We're the victims. We're doing our very best, but it's hard. So people, thank you for listening, and please watch part 4, because it gets into technology that'll blow your mind. But again, it's all a graduated revealing of the technology, and it's all the same stuff other victims are saying is happening to them. So.
Absolutely. So thanks so very much, Chris, for that. And not a saint here, just a journalist doing my job, just putting stories out in front of the American public, which a lot more journalists could really do, especially the ones who are paid those fat paychecks and then run off and do their CIA master's bidding, which is either lying or keeping silent about things like this. The New York Times comes to mind with their famous United States of Paranoia, which was disinformation beginning to end, lies, deception, and more lies beginning to end. So that's the frightful situation that we're currently facing. But it's a little freeing to recognize that people, journalists like the ones working at the New York Times are indeed lying openly, because it's possible now to say that, because that's the truth. So in
Ramola,
sorry?
This is the Manchurian candidate project. When I met the guy Greg at the bus stop, and he was wearing the gray sweatshirt that said Manchurian Candidate Project, I knew I was the Manchurian candidate, and there are others like me. But we have this huge media conglomerate, and nobody wants to touch the Manchurian project, the Manchurian Candidate Project. Ramola, you're the only person who is right now speaking to a full-blown Manchurian candidate who could be taken over at any minute to do something against his will. That's what we're going to describe happening in this hotel room. Thankfully, they only did it to me for about 8 minutes or something like that. But once that happens to you, you are scared to death, because they can take you over for as long as they want to. You are trapped in your own body. And so, people have to, if they're not interested in this technology, if they don't find, this transformation from owning your own soul to having another soul, superimposed into yours or onto yours, if they want to understand how, how these people can take you over to agree that you don't even know what kind of personality you have anymore. If the clone takes me over and he has a dry kind of personality, I'm stuck being a dry person, for the rest of my life without even knowing what my full potential was. I mean, that's where this is going. So everything from your knowledge base being wiped, your memories, all the way to doing things against your will. And then beyond that, what we're talking about is them, inserting these subliminal thoughts that are imperceptible. So you actually end up doing things that, and with, emotional injections, that could make you think that you got angry and reacted and responded and hurt somebody, I think, that's where they're going with this technology. They've crossed every ethical line.
Absolutely. It's crossed every ethical line, and that's really the crux of what we're trying to get across here. These are extremely unethical projects. There's nothing ethical about them. There's nothing human about them. They sound anti-human in the extreme because they're about human takeover and human brain takeover and human personality takeover. They're extreme in every way, and this is why, as you know, I've stepped forward and I'm attempting to document and record this for posterity and for all of humanity and the entire world to wake up and listen to. And, I thank you. I'm honored and privileged that you shared your story with me, Chris, and that we're able to do this series of podcasts. I look forward to the next podcast. I thank everybody for watching. Please stay tuned. Hopefully, between us releasing part 2 and part 3, or maybe part 1 and part 2, the print interview will be published so that you'll have both to look at. The print interview has Chris's own words in it, but so do these podcasts, of course, so you can see each one supplementing or complementing the other. So I thank you again for watching, all of us. For both of us, and thank you for being here this evening. And we'll pick up on this story very soon in part 4. Good night.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Good night.